Welcome back to the Strategic Veteran Podcast, a show where we explore the stories, strategies, and successes of veterans who are navigating resilience, transition, and growth. Whether you're a veteran or a family member or simply someone looking for inspiration, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Adam Peters, and today we're honored to bring you an insightful conversation with a guest who truly embodies what it means to lead with purpose and conviction. Joining us is Dave Rosenberg, a dynamic speaker, author, and podcast host who spent over 3 decades honing his craft in leadership and accountability. Dave's journey began in the U.S. Navy, where he first discovered the power of inspiring others under pressure. He served with distinction for nearly 7 years, and perhaps most memorably, he flew the very first Navy mission in support of Operation Desert Shield, a moment that was incredibly unplanned, unbriefed, and entirely by accident. But as you'll hear, Dave's time in uniform wasn't just about missions and military strategy. It was about discovering the profound impact leaders can have on the lives and careers of those they serve, an epiphany that would shape his future. After his service, Dave transitioned into the civilian world, only to find himself wondering, what skills do I really bring to the table? Like so many veterans, he initially doubted his value outside of the military, but what he later realized was powerful. The soft skills he'd cultivated during his service, critical thinking, resilience, and an uncanny knack for solving problems, were rarer and far more valuable than he'd ever imagined. Since then, Dave has built an impressive career. He's led 4 companies as president, worked with over 100 businesses across industries, and become a sought-after speaker on radical accountability, helping organizations foster strong, accountable teams. He's also the author of Locked On Leadership, a practical guide to building cultures of consistency, courage, and care. But what makes Dave's message so unique is his ability to weave lessons from his military service, martial arts training, and his own leadership journey into an approach that inspires transformation in both companies and individuals. Today, we'll explore the moments that define Dave's path, how he handled challenges like transitioning out of the Navy with a perceived lack of marketable skills, and how simple conversation with a struggling sailor became a turning point in his understanding of true leadership. Together, we'll unpack what radical accountability means, why veterans possess some of the most undervalued traits in the workforce, and how to unlock potential that even you may not realize you have. Dave, brother, welcome to the show, man. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited for this because I didn't know it, but you and I pretty much have the same philosophies and are doing the exact same work out here. So this is going to be awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited, and candidly, as I talk to more and more people, I realize we are not alone, brother.
No,
We
sir.
are not alone. This is the movement. This is the direction that I believe humanity is going. So we're
Yes,
just
sir.
we're just the vanguard.
Yeah, man. Dude, first question. Everybody gets it. Where did you grow up and what inspired you to join the Navy?
So first of all, go Eagles. I think that answers your question. Philly born and bred. You're shaking your head. Who's your team?
Well, I'm a Colts fan, so we didn't have a dog in the fight, but I really got upset when Washington beat Tampa Bay last night because I'm a huge Baker Mayfield fan, and I really wanted to see him have success, even though I would consider his season a success.
Yeah, I mean, look, won't go down this rabbit hole at this moment, but success is the journey, and certainly Baker Mayfield's on the journey, and you know, and frankly, the lesson to everybody who's listening, right, is just don't give up.
Right.
Failure only occurs once you stop moving forward.
So true, man. God, that's the first valuable point from this episode. 3 minutes and 40 seconds in. Go ahead and write that down, everybody. Anyway, brother, so you grew up in Philly.
Yeah, grew up in Philly. I ended up at Temple University as an engineering major because I was good at math and I had no idea what an engineer did. Mama, they have to be good at math. I'll pick that one. It actually worked out from a mindset perspective. It really was right for me. You and I were speaking before the show, and I believe there's no accidents. And there was no accident. I ended up as an engineer. It shaped the way I think. To this day, I see everything in terms of systems. We'll dig more into that, I'm sure, as we dig into radical accountability.
Yes, we will.
But since I was 8 years old, I fell in love with science fiction, and frankly, I was in school. I think my senior year, might have been towards the end of my junior year, and a friend of mine and I were talking. I was like, man, I don't know what I need to do, but I would love to be an astronaut. And he goes, you need to be a naval aviator. And I wore glasses. I have, now with, LASIKs and all of that, I don't wear them, but, I'm like, I can't fly. My vision isn't perfect. He goes, no, there's this thing called the Naval Flight Officer. And this is before Top Gun. Nobody knew, right? Just before Top Gun, actually. And I'm like, what's that? And he explained to me that there's roles in the aircraft that don't require uh, perfect vision. So I went down to the Navy recruiter. Um, I was I was such a punk. I ride down on my motorcycle. I literally put my boots up on his desk, lean back, and go, oh, I want to be a naval.
You did not do that.
God's honest truth.
That's ballsy, dude.
I was a cocky, and when I say I was a cocky son of a bitch, the reality is I was an insecure cocky son of a bitch.
Yeah.
Right? That's how I made up for my insecurity. And I don't mind saying that now. The ego to overcome the self doubt. And he looks at me, and I'll never forget the look on his face. He goes, well, you got to pass some tests first. And I'm like, bring it on. And at this point, so my scholastic career was an interesting one. Freshman year was the best 3 years of my life. I started off as a bluehead at University of Delaware, and after paying them a lot of money for repeating freshman year 3 times, they put me in a non-matriculating status, and I'd gone down a dark hole. I won't go into that, but I pulled myself out, and I was back at Temple University on the correct path. So I had discovered, though, that once I figured out what worked for me, that I was a really good test taker, a pretty good learner. When I listened and didn't try and take notes, that was my bugaboo, was taking notes. If I just paid attention, I was good. So I'm like, bring it on. And so I took the ASVABs, and afterwards his attitude changed. And next thing I know, I was reporting to Pensacola for Aviation Officer Candidate School, with the goal of becoming a F-14 Rio. That was my goal, and worked out.
So you're going to be Goose.
I was Goose, but I lived.
Yeah, perfect, man. Those are after the Army, I went to flight school. Similar story to you. I wanted, it was a dream of mine as a kid. National Geographic used to have these little trifolds that would go in a 3-ring binder of every military jet, and they all plastered my walls. And I've been in glasses since I was 2 years old. I have a lazy eye. I'm super farsighted, like +7 in my left eye. So like no shot in hell that I was ever going to get into the military to fly. And I remember in the foyer of my high school, when all the recruiters come around, I talked to the Navy guys first, and they just laughed at me, basically told me to fuck off. Like, you're never going to be a pilot. And when I talked to the Air Force guys, same thing. They just like, you're a fucking idiot. You're never going to fly. Tried to put in a warrant packet twice when I was in the Army. Same thing, hoping technology would evolve, PRK, LASIK, all of that. Still don't qualify for that. Learned really cool stuff about the eye and how those surgeries work. And if you're nearsighted, you've got a way better shot because they're just shaving away your eye. It's really hard to build up your eye when you're farsighted. And when I got out, I found out I could go to flight school, and that I could, as long as I was corrected to 2020, I could fly. And man, it was the coolest thing ever. So fellow pilot here, I don't know what training was like for you, or if you actually ever did get to, to control the stick or whatever, but flying's awesome, man. And good for you for being an F-14 Rio, or at least that's what you started out to do. That's another cool thing that we have in common, man.
Yeah. Well, to your point, as a naval flight officer, you don't train to fly. You do get some stick time, but it's not part of the syllabus. When you're up there in a 2-seater pilot trainer and you got a cool instructor, that you got it. So, I got a chance to fly. I don't think I ever flew the T-34 Bravo, which is fun, but the T-2, like we did a Huravac from Pensacola to Wright Pat, and I got to fly some of the legs in between, and the T-47, which is a Citation 2. But you don't get your ticket. I just got my pilot's license 2 years ago myself.
How was that for you, going later in life to flight school? Because this is something, and I think this is relevant for anybody who's getting out of the military. Yes, it's possible, no matter what your vision is, to become a pilot. So that's the first point I want to make, because I'm sure I'm not the only one that was in this position. I've talked to several of my Army buddies who are now, pilots with airlines because I took the step and went to flight school and all of that, and dealt with all the challenges of getting a medical from the FAA, particularly post, PTSD, TBI stuff. Had to pay lots and lots of money to go see neuropsychologists, and had to be seen by a psychiatrist once a quarter so that I could maintain the medical. But I learned a lot about what aviation actually is. And I was under the impression, like, you're going to go to flight school and they're going to teach you how to fly the airplane from point A to point B. Like, we know how airplanes are used. Unfortunately, that's not the case. What you do is you go turn circles in a box in the sky, and I fucking hated it. It was miserable. I did not enjoy it. I didn't enjoy training maneuvers over and over again. And then the dues that you have to pay if you want a career in aviation. Thank you, Congress, for deciding that we needed to have 1,500 hours to go to the airlines in 2014. You assholes, that wasn't necessary. Being a CFI did not appeal to me at all because I didn't want to do the same lesson with 5 students every single day in that box. So, what was that experience like for you, having gone through, the Navy's flight training to a degree, and then later in life coming back and getting your own license?
Yeah, so probably a little better than what I just heard, what I'm inferring from you, for a couple of reasons. So first of all, it had been literally decades. I went through flight training in Pensacola in 1987, 88. So literally the skies have changed, right? The whole air structure has changed since then. So, Bravo, Space Alpha, that whole structure didn't exist in the way it does today. That's number one. So I had to learn that piece of it. But the flight physics, that hasn't changed. I know that. I have an engineering degree. That piece was a piece of cake. For me, it was about learning the monkey skills. So the things that you just said you hated doing, going in the box, doing those flight maneuvers, steep turns, stalls, all that stuff. I love that. To
Oh,
me,
no, not me.
to me, the best part of flying is the landing, though. That's I could go into pattern for hours. So for me, it was all about learning the monkey skills. And actually, I didn't set out to get my certificate. I actually set out just to solo. My goal was to take off and land on my own,
Hell
because
yeah.
I had done the stuff in between, but
Right.
I'd never taken off or landed on my own. So the day I soloed was like, it was like, to check that box, got that done, but I loved flying. So I know from solo to certificate is, you do your cross countries, you're done.
That's a
You get,
piece of cake. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And the actual check ride itself, where I worked hard for it, it was like, I was so over prepared for it,
Yeah.
which was because I had done flight planning so much in my career. It all just came rushing back to me. And it's so much easier with electronic flight bags than it was in my day,
Yeah.
So I enjoyed that. I still only have my private. I joined the Civil Air Patrol actually to try and fly some more. Whew. Well, I love the guys in my squadron, and it filled back in that hole that was missing since I got out of that service. That sense of camaraderie, that sense of mission, the things we're going to talk about that help people in their careers that they don't even know about. And I said this going in, but I didn't realize how bad it was. The challenge with the Civil Air Patrol, it's a mashup of two of the worst possible things in the world: the U.S. government and volunteer organizations.
Yep.
Okay, and what I discovered is they've replaced leadership with bureaucracy.
Yep.
And I had a tail strike doing a proficiency hop, so it was mandated that you had to do certain takeoffs and landings. I was doing a soft field takeoff, and I over rotated and scraped the pad eye hook. No serious damage. And now they're like, we're assessing you for the repair cost. And it wasn't a big number. It was a principal thing. I'm like, this is a technique. This wasn't like I was goofing around. I was practicing a technique because it's a technique that, like any technique, it requires practice, which means there's a possibility of failure. And I failed, and I learned a valuable lesson. But why are you punishing me for this? And then, they had this whole process, and it ended up taking, over 120 days, I still didn't get the official assessment letter, which I had to wait on to appeal. And by then, my year was up, and I was had to renew. I'm like, I'm not renewing with this, bill hanging over my head, And I'm actually in touch with the commanding general, national headquarters, and she's like, oh yes, this is a process we need to make better, blah 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 blah. But no, I can't do anything about it. I'm like,
Of course.
okay. So at any rate, I don't want to go too far there. So
Yeah, no. Anyway, so you give us the highlight reel of your military career. You had a shorter career in comparison to some guys that have been on here. I'm really interested in what you did when you got out, the transition, and what you're doing now, and all the leadership stuff. Really, the military kind of thing is to get people to know who you are. However, I think we've already kind of done that through the introduction and just the back and forth with relating to flight school. I think they understand what kind of person you are and what you're capable of. So what are some of the things that stand out in your mind that were really impactful that you still carry with you today from your military?
Yeah, probably the three things that I got out of the military. The one is the understanding that I can learn that hard skills are almost irrelevant. Okay. If you think about our military career, I don't know what it's like in the Army, but in the Navy, you change jobs frequently. Probably every 18 months, you're getting a new job. And you got to get up to speed like that, right? So, I was division officer, and then I was legal officer, and then I was operations, right, in my career. And I realized that give me 3 months. It's actually less than 3 months. It's probably about 2 months to learn the job and 3 months to become really proficient at the job. And in fact, I got hired as a fractional COO about 2 years ago for a digital marketing agency. And I told the guy, he's like, it's going to take you a while to get up to speed. I'm like, no, it's not. I'm like, 2 months, I'll have this job wired. He goes, this is really complicated. But 2 months later, I'm like, look, you don't have to tell me that. I know what I'm doing. Let me go.
Yeah.
That was a skill I learned in the military. So that was number one. Number two is that sense of mission. And I remember my first civilian job working for somebody else, because immediately out of the military, I started my first business, but that didn't work out. And I went to work in telecom and sales, and I was doing telecommunication sales. So was selling phone systems. This is before voice over IP, and where every office had a phone on their desk. And I had this portable demo kit. This was in the beginning, so I hadn't done it yet, but to take out to people to show them what I was selling them. And I was going through the user's guide with the demo system set on my desk so I could learn what the features are, thinking, okay, how do you apply this? How do I sell this? That sort of stuff. And I was in a bullpen area, and I became peripherally aware of people walking past me. And I picked my head up, and I realized everyone's leaving for the day. And one of the customer service reps looked at me and said, are you working overtime? Overtime?
Yeah, what is overtime?
No, I haven't finished what I set out to do today. So my day's not over. And it was that sense of mission accomplishment, that the mission is everything. It was anathema to the civilians, right? But it's something we take for granted. In the military, it's what am I going to do today? And then you do it, because otherwise tomorrow is even worse, right? Because then you have tomorrow's stuff plus what was left over. So mission accomplishment, that was the number two. But the biggest thing was my understanding of the effects of leadership on others. And I share, this is actually my signature keynote in a nutshell. And I'll try and keep this succinct, but normally this takes an hour to tell.
I mean, there's a lot to say about leadership, and it's really funny. Don't take this the wrong way, but I've had several of you Navy flyboys on here, and all of you end up in leadership coaching. I think there's something to be said about that. I really do. I really think if I'm looking at this, because I can think of 5 Navy aviators that I've had on this show in the 80 or almost 90 now episodes that I've done. So you're number 6. Every single one of you is in the coaching business. You're also in the public speaking business. And there's something to be said about that, because, a lot of people that come on this show, from all branches, they talk about leadership and how important leadership is. It's definitely one of those, you call them soft skills, I call them high leverage skills that we learn over the course of our careers. And I call them that for a reason, because they are highly leverageable in the civilian world. But of all of those people, you guys are the most successful, particularly naval aviators, in starting and scaling and running these giant leadership coaching businesses, particularly on the executive level. And I think there's something to be said about that. So I'm really interested to hear what your experience and why you might think that is, and kind of your philosophy on leadership. So if it takes an hour to explain it, then it takes an hour to explain it, because that's valuable information for those listening.
Sure. And there's a lot going on there. The story was actually just sort of my inspiration when I realized the import of leadership. The answer to your question, I think, goes a little different direction. The short answer to why I think naval aviators are so successful here is it's a sexy career. Okay. With the advent of Top Gun especially, but even Air Force guys who aren't as good at aviators as us, but they're still sexy. But it's a sexy career, right? And so people go naval aviation and they can't imagine doing it. And so there's a certain gravitas just to having that in your background. And it was something that I didn't recognize at first. It's not like you come out of that going, I was all this stuff, you actually come out, at least for me, it was like when I was in, it was like, people go, what do you do? And I would say, I'm a naval officer. And I would say it like that on purpose. I go, oh, what do you do in the Navy? Oh, I fly. And it was because I didn't want to go, I fly, blah, blah, blah. But I knew they were going to pull it out of me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I go into sales. And it was like, what do you do? I'm in sales, right? Because I didn't see the value of being in sales. And it wasn't until much later where I had a sales manager say, listen, man, the economy runs on sales. Nothing happens in this country until something is sold. And then when I learned to sell correctly, and I don't get to go down that rabbit hole, then the pride came into what I was doing, which, by the way, is a foundational piece of my leadership, which is getting people to understand why they do what they do. Right? Mm-hmm. That's how you get to people to be accountable to what they're doing, because they're taking pride in it, because they know it's important. They know nobody buys anything that isn't of greater value to them than the money they are spending to buy it. And you are helping them out, doing something or giving them something that they couldn't do for themselves. And when you start to realize what that is and take pride in that, it all of a sudden becomes more important for you to do it well. Like the perfect example I give to all the time on this is, you think about plumbing, right? How sexy is plumbing, right? We know what the image of plumbing is, right? Butt crack and all.
Right.
What if I told you, and it's the truth, that plumbers are responsible for the existence of civilization?
Oh, 100%.
Without irrigation and sewage, we could not exist as a civilization.
Yeah.
If you're a plumber and you hear that and you didn't realize that before, how high does your pride go in what you do? Right?
Through the roof. It should, anyway.
I would hope so.
Yeah.
Right. So that's my point there. So purpose. And I'd actually tell to my origin story. I was a legal officer at VF 211, and I don't know if the Army and Air Force, I assume they have something like that. We're obviously not lawyers, and we're the experts in the UCMJ, and we're the ones who advise the COs how to administer the UCMJ, whether it's Article 13, Captain's Mass Office Hours, whatever you want to call that, or recommendation in supporting a JAG in a courts martial. Hopefully it doesn't get to that severity, and everything in between. Mm-hmm. And so, it was my responsibility to read the reports from the chiefs and whatnot on sailors that were screwing up. And I get one across my desk one day, some young sailor written up for dereliction of duty. And normally when I tell this story, I have to explain it. It just means they weren't doing their job right, because it sounds so horrific. And he had just joined the squadron. So, first thing you do is you do a counseling session, right? It doesn't need to go to captain's master or beyond. Let's just have a talk. I know the chief already talked to him a couple of times, and maybe, having some brass on the collar might be able to bring that point home. And so I bring the young sailor into my office, and long story short, he was trained as an electronics technician, and we stuck him in the first lieutenant's division, which is the Navy version of a janitor shop. So here you have this, guy joined the Navy, all excited to be working on the electronics of the F-14, and what's he doing? He's swabbing heads and cleaning toilets and doing all that, fun stuff. And so he was walking through it and just going through the paces, and he got written up. And I had no idea what to say to him. 2 years of flight training, officer candidate school, none of it's about how do you have that conversation. And I remember thinking about my dad, because my dad was a school teacher in Kensington, which is the neighborhood in Philadelphia where the movie Rocky was shot. So we're talking the poorest of poor. And he was a high school teacher, and he had a lot of success, though, with his kids going on to college, which was virtually unheard of. A union shop was probably the best most people strove for. And what he told me was really important, and this played in my head. He said, it's not enough to tell people why it's important to them, because they could blow that off. Oh, that's not important to me. You don't know me. But connect it why it's important to others.
Mm-hmm.
Get them thinking outside themselves. And if you think about in the military, this is what we're trained to do. It's all about the team. Anybody you may know, and I'm sure you're a combat vet, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know what your decorations are, but and anyone with any award of valor, Silver Star, Bronze Star, even a Purple Heart, right? Everyone I've met and or interviewed or read about says the same thing, which is, I didn't do anything special. I don't deserve this. And the reason is, in their mind, what they did was what anybody who happened to be standing where they were standing at that moment would have done. Because if they didn't do it, their brothers and sisters would have been harmed.
100%, man. That's exactly what it is. Yep.
So why am I getting a medal for just doing my job?
Yep.
For the record, for those listening the outside looking in, Petty Officer Mansour, the SEAL, jumped on the grenade. I think it wasn't Fallujah, but
I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, man. Maybe a lot of his brothers would have done that, but still, that's Medal of Honor stuff, and that's what he, unfortunately, posthumously, but that's what he received. So you deserve it. You
Mm-hmm.
may not believe it, but you deserve it. But I digress. So how do I connect cleaning heads
to working on electronics, what he was supposed to be doing?
Yeah.
And this is not just in the Navy. I was an infantry guy in the Army, and to answer some of your questions, yeah, we changed jobs, not nearly as frequency as officers in the Navy probably, but part of my leadership style and what I was blessed enough to have when I was coming up in the Army was people teaching me the job 2 steps above me. So when you're just a private on a fire team, usually you start carrying the fucking 240 or the saw because nobody wants to do that. They're teaching you how to be a team leader, and you're expected to watch how you become a squad leader. Now, it wasn't always the case, particularly when I first came in early 2000s, 2003. I didn't want to see my squad leader. It was going to be a bad day if I saw my squad leader, right? But I did learn a ton from my team leader, and I would carry that philosophy with me throughout the whole thing. But, as a private, I came into the Army and I thought I was going to be jumping out of helicopters and fast roping and shooting a lot of things. And really what I was doing was cleaning fucking weapons around the company and scrubbing fucking toilets and mopping floors, right? Like when you're in garrison as an infantry soldier, you're a fucking glorified janitor. That's really what you are. And it just is what it is. So I relate to this story so much. Unfortunately, I feel like that's just kind of the military, and there's not a lot you can even say to them. Like you're going to do what the Navy wants you to do, regardless of what they've trained you to do, and you just have to get into this mindset of like, this is the mission the Navy has for you, or the Army, or the Air Force, or the Marine Corps, or the Coast Guard, and you just have to do it. You have to do it to the best of your ability, right?
Yes, and this is what I said to this young sailor. I said 2 things. I said, first of all, we were in pre-deployment. So we're getting ready for deployment. We're working 18-hour days. And I reminded him of that. I said, imagine for a second if you were in this shop. It's the end of a long day. You're tired, you're exhausted, and you know all you have to look forward to is rinse and repeat, because it's Groundhog Day. Tomorrow is going to be just like today, and it's going to be that way for the next, until we go into Palm the month before we leave, right? It's the end of the day. You're going to go back to the barracks. You're going to throw some food on your gullet, and then you're going to hit the rack and fall asleep and pass out. Last thing you want to do before you leave the squadron spaces is get cleaned up, and you walk into the head, and it's a shit sty. I mean, the toilet is stained. There's no toilet paper. You just want to splash water in your face. You walk over to the sink, but you can't see your face because there's all the soap scum on the mirror. You put some water in your face. You reach over blindly to the paper towels that aren't there, and you just sort of wipe yourself on your dirty, grimy uniform. You walk away, and what do you start thinking to yourself? I am busting my hump to get this stuff done, and nobody effing cares. They can't even keep the goddamn head clean.
Yeah. Yep.
What's that do for morale? Yeah. On the other hand, imagine you walk in and it's spick and span. It looks like Mr. Clean himself was there. The toilet glistens. Ding! You walk over, the mirror is spotless. You see yourself smiling, maybe not smiling face in there, but you see your face. You wash yourself, there's soap in the dispenser, there's paper towels, and you think, wow, they care about me. That's what first lieutenants does. It drives morale. Mm-hmm. Your shipmates are depending on you because they got a job to do as well. Now, let me ask you something. Now it's time to tie it into how it's now. Okay, wow, this is more important than I thought. Do you think the chiefs don't know you hate being first lieutenants? Of course they do. Now, what happens if you're like the best first lieutenant in the history of the Navy? John Paul Jones himself has never seen toilets as clean as what you're doing. Of course, they didn't have toilets back then, but that's another conversation. Do you think the chiefs are going to go, oh, we got to keep him in the first lieutenant's division? He's too good to put in the shop. No. They're going to say, if he's doing a job he hates this good, how good is he going to be an electronics technician doing what he wants to do? And You'll get out of that job so fast. And then I gave him advice that I had heard from a buddy of mine, a fellow lieutenant who had gone through the academy, but because of that had 4 years more experience in the military than I did. And he said, bloom where you're planted. I don't care if it's a pile of shit. You plant a rose seed in there, you be a rose. You'll grow. You'll rarely do something you hate. And if you do, it won't be for long.
Dude, that's amazing advice. I love that so much. Let's move into, when did you realize that your dream of becoming an astronaut was probably not going to be a reality, and then decide to get out?
So those aren't actually connected, but I realized it wasn't going to be a reality when I had the application sitting on my desk. We had 2 guys from my squadron already get accepted into the astronaut program. One of whom I know has been to space a couple times. The other one, I don't know whether he made it or not. I assume he did, though. One of our department heads and one of my fellow lieutenants. And I'm looking at the application, and I had all this self-doubt. College took me 8 years to get through. I don't have a master's degree. All that head trash about why I'm not good enough.
Imposter syndrome.
Oh, big time. Big time. And I crumbled it up and I threw it in a trash can and I chickened out. That's when I knew I wasn't going to be an astronaut. And let me rephrase that. That's when I gave up at that time. To this day, though, because I'm a different man today. I've grown. If NASA taps me on the shoulder right now, this podcast is over and I'm going.
I don't blame you. Yeah. I mean, absolutely.
And the dream is alive again. I just don't know how I'm going to get there. But my intention is out in the universe. So, to get into space. So it's not dead. It's revised, just in a different form.
Yeah.
When I got out of the Navy, so I was in 87 and 93. In 92, when Clinton was elected, Reagan's 600 ship Navy, which we hadn't hit, became a thing of the past. And I was still USNR, so with a AOC commissioned. You were a reserve officer. I had never augmented. When I had the opportunity to augment, I took some bad advice. Somebody said, if you augment, you won't be able to get the reenlistment bonus. They were paying like $30,000 to re-up as an aviator. Well, they started getting rid of USNRs, and so I was USNR. I wasn't number one ranked lieutenant. Bye
See
bye.
ya.
Yep.
And this is going to be an interesting because your career ended. This is just an assumption. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you didn't want your career to end. Much like how my career ended in 2015 after 4 deployments, 3 to Iraq, 1 to Afghanistan, a bunch of injuries, that kind of thing. Just wasn't fit to be an infantry soldier anymore, and particularly an infantry leader, senior non-commissioned officer at that time. And, in my mind, I'm going to 22 years, which would have been this year, which is really interesting, right? So 2025, June of 2025 would have been my actual retirement date. All of that was pushed back, 10 years. 10 years. I missed 10 years of my career. So my 10-year plan is just vaporized in an instant. And that brings its own unique set of challenges inside of the transition. And that's really what this show is here to demonstrate is that we're not alone in the issues that we face when we transition out. And it's everything that I'm working to change with the transition process, because it hasn't changed since when you got out to when I got out to when these guys are getting out now, guys and gals. And in fact, just confirmed this last week. I got to talk to a skill bridge program, and they're dealing with the same problems that you and I dealt with. So let's talk about those challenges that you faced in your transition, particularly with a career that ends long before you expect.
Yeah. So I actually faced that challenge a little over a year later. Okay.
Okay.
Because while I was in, and I was on deployment when I got word,
Mm-hmm.
a friend of mine who was an officer candidate at school with me, who was one of the pilots in the squadron, we came up with this idea and started. As soon as we got back, we started. He was still active duty, but we started a business that we were solving a problem that got solved a year later with the internet by people with bigger and deeper pockets. We really don't need to go into what that was, but at that point now, I'm like running out of money, because I did get some money because I had been in over 6 years. I did so that I had been able to live on. And I was running out of money, and I had to get a job. And I'm sitting there going, I don't know what I can do. Right. I was a really good radar intercept officer. I could tweak the AUG-10 radar and find people in the worst of conditions, because things were different. This is 1960s technology. We had to manually run those radars. It's not like the computers today. And so I was really good at that. I can affect an intercept with the best of them. Okay, great comms. I'm not sure what job that is in civilian life.
Right. Right. How do we translate that to civilian life? Yeah.
Yeah. And I ended up engaging a personal marketing company to help me develop my resume and figure that out. The reality is, I still didn't believe I had any real skills, but I was lucky enough to sell myself a job in sales. And, I think that's not an unusual path either for us.
No, it's the most common path, particularly for combat arms MOSs. It's like a instant funnel to sales that they just try to throw everybody. I started in sales. And you mentioned some advice you got in sales, which we won't go down the sales rabbit hole, but to your point, I got some really great advice when I was in the sales community. Sales, like you said, is the driving force of everything in the United States. And if you think about life, you're either buying or selling something, always, all the time. And so it is the most common path for those of us who get out. It's the lowest barrier to entry. They're a dime a dozen. I mean, you've seen it across all industries. 1099 sales guys, eat what you kill. Good luck, figure it out. Not a lot of training, that kind of stuff. And it's a miserable career. It doesn't have to be, but it's miserable.
Well, it's miserable if you're not successful at it. I was, although it wasn't instantaneous. I went 3 months without selling anything, and I had a conversation with my first boss at the beginning of month 4, where he's like, "I know you're going to do a great job, and I have absolute faith in you, and I've got to change your comp plan because you're getting paid too much salary." you know.
Yeah, I've had those conversations too, because it does take a while to get your feet underneath you and learn the game of sales. And I probably went 3 months without a sale as well. And then you make the one sale and you see the money attached to it, depending on what industry you're in. And you're like, okay, I can do this.
It wasn't so much about the money attached to it. Yes, that happened to me. So I got hired in January of 95, April of 95. Last week, I made 2 sales.
Yeah,
I had a 30,000 a month quota. I sold 5,000, but it was 2 sales. It was enough to get me into May, right?
yeah, right.
May I think I hit 22.5, which was enough to get me into June. In June, I hit 45 and never looked back, because once the light bulb came on, it came on.
Right.
But the challenge was, and I think this is the challenge many of us from the military have, is, the first step in sales is connecting with people, bonding and rapport, right? Well, in the military, we're taught very much, just, here are the facts, right? When you report or you're doing a briefing or something, here's what's going on, right? Here's my 9-line brief, or here's a sit rep, here are the facts. So you go into a sales thing and go, you need this, and this. No connection, right? So it took me 4 months to figure out how to step back and connect with people. But like I said, the real lessons are actually much more subtle than that. The mission accomplishment was one, because I had this mission. I was going to sell. I had a quota, right? And so that's what the plus side we bring to the table is that sense of focus that I won't say doesn't exist, but because it does. The people who achieve a lot, they have that sense of focus.
Yeah.
We as veterans, though, as a group, are taught that because it's in the culture across every branch. Get the job done.
Every time. So how did you break through that mindset of thinking you didn't have any marketable skills? What was that moment for you, like, that got you out of that mindset into, like you said, the light bulb coming on and realizing, oh, I am capable of this. I do have these.
So, like I said, I hired a personal marketing company. I remember I had to put it on my credit card, because I couldn't afford it. It was one of those things, like, as an investment in myself and rolling the dice that they weren't full of it, and they weren't. And so part of their interview process with you to develop the resume is talk about what you did, and then they would write it out, in the resume for you. And I would read it, and it reminded me a lot of writing fit reps and evals, where you make a shitbag sound like he's good, and you make a really good guy sound like he's God, right?
Yeah.
So everybody feels good, but if you can read between the lines, who are the also, right?
Yeah.
And so part of my self-doubt, though, was I'm reading, all this stuff that they see in me that I don't see in me. Okay. And it got me that first job in sales. And it wasn't until I started performing, I stepped up and actually started performing, that I realized, yeah, you know what? They're right. I do have this sense of drive, this mission accomplishment. I have this sense of, I don't remember what all the things were at the time, but that's when it was like, the story I already shared about the people leaving and the overtime, right? And frankly, the fact that, I hit those sales numbers, and I was hired to tell people, when I was hired, the boss, who was also a vet, by the way, so he was a former second-class petty officer, but he told me, he said, I can't teach you how to sell. He was selling and he could do it himself, but he's like, I can't teach you how to sell. And I said, I can learn any job in 3 months. Don't worry about it. Because I knew that much, because I'd already changed jobs so many times, right? I'm like,
Right.
I can learn a job in 3 months. Don't worry about it. And it took me 4, so, I underestimated. But at the time, who knew, right? I didn't truly know until I did it. And then I'm like, oh, there's one more time where I learned a job quickly. And then, sales is a roller coaster. And so I did good in June. I did good in July. In August, my pipeline had dried up a bunch because I was doing all the closing, the typical stuff.
Yeah.
And so I went back and did the same thing I did to get it filled again, and it filled back up again. And that's when I started to believe,
Yeah, because what you're talking about, being able to learn any job in 3 months because your Navy career had you doing a different job every 18 months, you pick it up really quick. That's the adaptability piece. It's one of the highest leverage skills we have, right? You've mentioned leadership, adaptability, problem solving. Those are all the high leverage skills that I call them high leverage. You call them soft skills that we don't put a lot of stock into or consider when we're getting out. And it's interesting to me that we don't, because those skills are being cultivated from the day you ship to basic training. You just don't realize it. And each step along your journey, from the lowest private to the 4-star generals that are out there, you're just shaping those skills and refining those skills to an infinitesimal level as you climb the ladder in the military. And we're so quick to abandon them when we get out. And I don't understand why. I'm guilty of it, just like you're guilty of it, just like everybody that came before you and everybody that's going to come after me is guilty of it. And it's a large part of why I'm out here doing what I'm doing, is to make people aware that, like, you are worth so much more than your service, and you have all of these incredible skills, and with the right mindset. And I think one of the biggest things I see is people not willing to take the step back and start at kind of the bottom, knowing they have all these skills, and you're not going to spend a whole lot of time at the bottom. You're going to climb that ladder a lot faster than your peers in the civilian world are going to climb that ladder. Is that something that you agree with and have experienced yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. You said something which I'd never thought about before, and it just sort of, I want to share this with you, because I guarantee in your boot camp versus my officer candidate school, you had the same experience, right? So in officer candidate school, you are in what they call an unsecure status. You don't get liberty for 4 weeks. You get Sunday on base, but you can't leave base. And then you get a RLP, room, locker, and personnel inspection in week 4 for your class. And if the class passes whatever the passing number is, then you get liberty from, I think, like Saturday after secure a quarter. So once the barracks are clean, to like Sunday 1600, we would go in town and get a hotel room and we get drunk. Typical, military stuff.
Yep.
And so our first RLP inspection, right? So, they give you all the parameters, right? One of the things I love about the military is nothing is hidden, right?
Mm-hmm.
The path to success is laid out there for nobody. Nobody plays hide this army. It's like, if you do this, this will happen. And if you fail by this much, it's not going to happen, which, by the way, is another skill set. What do you call them? High value skill set.
High leverage.
High leverage skill set. That we have. And so when my class started doing our first one, we're like, well, your skivvies had to be folded in 6-inch by 6-inch squares, and then the turn down on your rack had to be a 6-inch turn down. So we started, okay, you're going to fold everybody's skivvy, so everybody's is exactly the same. You're going to polish everybody's brass. You're going to polish everybody's boots. And it wasn't like assigned. It was like, who wants to do this? Who wants to do that? So that we had M1 Garand rifles, by the way. We didn't shoot them, but we marched with them. We held them out for 20 minutes. That's because they were 16-pound rifles.
Yeah, they weigh a ton.
Yeah. So, you'll clean, we had to break them down. You'll clean the right, so we had assigned, instead of everybody being responsible for doing everything for themselves, we went around, I think there were like 40 of us in my class, and somebody or 2 people, whatever it was, would do the same job. So they were all identical.
Standardized.
Right. And so when you were talking about problem solving, and I'm like, I never even thought about that, but right. Day one, whatever it was, in officer candidate school, we were required to solve problems, and that was just part and parcel. And I think the reason that we dismiss that as veterans in transition, when we don't have that civilian life to look on, is because I think the thought is, well, it's just the military way.
Yeah.
It's just, it's the way. But I'm leaving, and for many, I think, who are leaving, like you and I, neither one of us wanted to leave.
Nope.
And you're absolutely right. I was married and separated already, and I'm like, I love deployment. I really did. And I'm like, I could do this. I was getting paid to fly fighters. I could do this for the rest of my life, But as I mentioned, Uncle Sam had other ideas.
Yeah.
Right. But for many, it's like, you know what? I did my time. I'm ready to move on, and I'm proud of what I did, and I want to get past it. And so they want to leave it behind. Instead of, let's take the pieces that we really enjoyed or that we were good at or that will help us and take them with us.
So how did you land on Locked On Leadership and everything that you're doing now?
So My career, as I went to work for this company, I became the sales manager, went to a competitor when, things went south with him, which was interesting because I just wanted to do sales. I don't want to manage people. I don't want to lead people. 2 years later, I was VP of operations there. Um, and so at that point, I'm like, I could sell it because I was very successful in sales. I could handle the operations. Why am I making money for somebody else? So I started my own telecom business, which I ended up selling. And leveraging that, I ended up running two more companies as president until 2015. I was looking for work again, and a friend of mine who had been a friendly competitor initially and then a vendor of mine when I was running other companies, had an IT company, asked me to go to work for him. He was a $500,000 company. And I'm like, you're not giving up over 20% of your revenue to pay me, and that's what it's going to take. He said, well, can you consult with me and my wife? We really need help. And they're 20 years my junior. So, I said, while I'm looking for work, sure. And from that, I'm like, I remember having a conversation with my wife, and I'm like, I can continue looking for work. It'll take me 6 months to a year, I figure, to find the right job. In 3 or 5 years from then, they'll sell it, or the kids will come in and want to run it, right? Something is going to happen, and I'm going to be doing this all over again. And I was in my 50s, and I'm like, I don't want to do that. I've bet on me in the past. I'm going to bet on me in the future. So I leveraged that consulting gig. I said, you know what? Let's just start coaching. And at the same time, I had met a guy who's a good friend of mine now. He's a retired lieutenant colonel, Air Force. He had been in Kosovo. He tells some great stories about having Sam shot at him. And he's a professional speaker. And so when we meet, he's like, you could be doing this too. And I'm like, yeah, I could. I'm never uncomfortable in front of a crowd. And so I took that and here I am. So Locked On Leadership, I had hired a branding, I guess it's this side. Locked On Leadership, I hired a branding coach to help me develop the name. And then the logo came from a 99 design, here
Yeah.
I am, 10 years later. Can't believe it's been 10 years, but 10 years later, here I am. So
What are your thoughts on? I really think that the easiest kind of thing to pivot to when you get out is some kind of consulting. I think there's such a need for it in the civilian world right now, particularly, for those of us who are, maybe senior NCO level and above, even some junior NCOs, I think are good enough and smart enough to put together their own programs to go to different, even small to medium sized businesses around your local economies could benefit from those high leverage skills that we have that we're by and large experts in. What would you say to that? I mean, I think there's something to that, and I'm seeing it a lot more. A lot of veterans getting into coaching, from using master resiliency training to coach teens and how to be more resilient, or coach parents and how to raise their teens to be more resilient. To other Navy flyboys who are, and I love Brandon Jenkins and his model with his coaching business about teaching people how to break out of the golden path fallacy and find your own blueprint in life. I think all of this is all the same, right? Like it's all kind of the same principle based around leadership and really understanding who you are as a person and what you're bringing to the table. How can people do what you do? How can they get into a space like that and feel comfortable betting on themselves and the skills that they've acquired over their military career?
well, I think there's a few things here to unpack. Number one is only do this if you're called to do it. That's really important. Okay. I don't care what it is you're called to do. That's what I recommend that you do, even if you don't think you can make money at it. I mean, Tony Hawk, skateboarding didn't exist as a professional thing when Tony Hawk was called to be a skateboarder. But look what he did with it. Okay. And there's countless stories like that. If we are of service to others, we'll never be poor. We may not have a lot of money and we'll never be poor. Okay. I don't mean selfless service to the point where you are enabling. Okay. There's a real distinction here. But if we're giving true value, money is nothing more than an IOU for value received. So if you're out there giving value that others need, What are you called to do in service of others that they need? You'll get paid for that.
Oh,
And
yeah.
however much you get paid, I promise you, it'll be more than enough because you're working, doing what you love to do. And the reality is you probably can leverage it to make a very good living. So that's number one. If, however, you are called to do coaching, and I agree with you, our experiences make us really good for that, especially if you've been in any leadership, not necessarily officer only, and not even necessarily senior enlisted leadership. Obviously, those two groups, but even junior, if you're a fire team leader, right? Which I believe E4, right? Typically corporals are fire team leaders, right? You're a leader.
Well, and to your point, so in the Army, at least what I was taught as a leader coming up, the three things an NCO must do is lead, train, and mentor. Well, that's what coaching is. You're leading, training, and mentoring people. We're really good at that because from the time I was a PFC to the time I was a senior, E6 promotable on my way out the door, I was teaching all of the skills, right? All of them, right? Like, so, and leading and mentoring. And still to this day, lots of kids that I still mentor that are still in the Army in March. I'm excited to go to a drill sergeant school graduation for one of the kids that I've mentored. You know what I mean? And that's why I think it's such an easy transition into coaching or consulting because you're already familiar with how to do it. Just believe in yourself a little bit.
Yeah, and the advantage that you have, each and every one of us has that doesn't exist in the civilian life, is if you think about how many examples, forget about the schooling, forget about the leadership training you have. You get that, which I shouldn't say nobody, but few people in civilian life get the benefit of. But how many examples do you have? In the Navy, the CO, or the commanding officer, changes every 18 months. You get somebody new. Then you have your new department heads. Okay. Then you have your new branch officers. Then you have your new chiefs, right? And senior, right? So you have all these examples of different leadership styles. And what we get to do is pick and choose. So, one of the guys I was with, he was the Air Wing operations officer when I first met him, and then he became the XO and then the CO of my sister squadron. I switched squadrons at that point. And personally, he was a great guy. But I will tell you his leadership style, he was a screamer and a yeller. It sucked. Well, even that, you get to experience that. You get to go, that doesn't work for me. Now, if it does, maybe you adopt it, which is fine. You've chosen, that's your choice. But you're going, that doesn't work for me. I know what not to do, which is sometimes so much more important than what to do.
Yes. Yes.
So you have that. Pick and choose what works for you. Okay. And at the end of the day, every one of us in the leadership space, every single one of us actually works on the same thing with each one of our individuals. We couch it differently, but it's the same thing. How do I get you to be the best you can be? That is what leadership is.
That's
pure
it.
And simple.
That's it.
And so figure out what your take on that is, how you're going to do it differently, what works for you. Because what I say, I'm going to appeal to some people, but I'm not going to appeal to everybody.
Nope.
Even though the goal is the same, somebody else may appeal to somebody who goes, yeah, that Dave, he's full of crap. That doesn't work for me. Oh, it's just, but he hears somebody else say basically the same thing I'm saying, but differently. And he goes, oh, that's for me.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's just packaged with a different bow on it. It's the same shit. Right.
Yeah.
Like, and I very much realize that my leadership style is very blunt. I don't pull any punches. I don't beat around the bush. I tell you exactly what the problem is, whether you're, ready to receive that or not. And I understand that in the work that I'm doing, that's not going to be for everybody. I'm not going to be able to help everybody, but there's a fuck ton of people out there who really resonate with that. And I prove that on a daily basis. And I just lean into that because this is who I am as a person, authentically myself. And this is the way I choose to approach it. And that works for a lot of people. And for those that it doesn't work with, I'm happy to connect you with somebody who may have a different leadership style than me. And I'm happy to facilitate that for you, because I realize that I can't help you in the way that you need to be helped. And that's okay. There are more of me out there, right? You're out there. And Dave Rosenberg is going to do it differently than Adam Peters does, but it's all the same shit. We're teaching the same stuff. And man, it's so powerful. Like, how do we, and this kind of final thought as we wrap it up here, because I'm at a loss for this, Dave, and I think you do this as much as I do. I do it primarily in the veteran transitioning space, but how do we get people to understand and really believe in themselves and just take that shot on themselves, instead of, pigeonholing themselves into this career that makes them completely fucking miserable and makes them want to kill themselves because somebody told them that's what they have to do? How can we make them realize, like, you have your own set of core beliefs, values, and passions, and you can pursue a life that's aligned with those things? How do we get them to believe that?
It's a great question, and the answer to that actually lies in the work of the famed Abraham Maslow. Right. Most people, or many people, are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but I don't think many people really thought about what that is. And what that is, it's the pathway to self-actualization is actually a recipe for survival. Right. So these are survival traits. The lower level needs are survival traits that must be met before we could even think about what is it I want to do. So when we facilitate people meeting those needs, right? So physiological needs, getting a job. So, maybe the first thing you do is you just help somebody get a job so they put food on the table and they don't have to worry about that. Then safety and security, right? Making sure they're good at their job and they succeed at their job and they excel at their job. Right? And then love and belonging, identifying what are your values. I know what mine are. By the way, at 63 years old, I know what my values are. At 58, I couldn't have articulated my values. I knew what they were
But you couldn't articulate them. And I'm the same way. I was, at 30 years old, I couldn't. It wouldn't be until I was 38 years old that I could do that. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, it's a similar story.
Yeah. When you figure out what your values are, then you figure out who your tribe is. You and we haven't spoken about what our specific values are. I have no doubt they are in alignment.
100%. Yeah.
My number one value, and I know that is personal sovereignty. We are responsible for ourselves. We are king or queen of our own castle, of our own lives, and we are the ones responsible for how it turns out. Nobody else. Period.
My number one value is discipline. So, pretty similar there, right? Like, because you have to be disciplined in order to realize what you just said.
Yeah.
And then, a version of what you said, and then some other, military values that I carry with me, and I'm sure you carry with you. But yeah, and it's really that simple. Lean into those values, the Army values, the acronyms: leadership, LDR, SH, IP, right? Loyalty, duty, honor, integrity, selfless service, personal courage, right? You can take those and bring those into your personal life after you leave the military, and you should latch on to some of those. You know what I mean? And then you'll live a better life by still kind of adapting and following a life that is in tune with those values, if you will.
Yeah, and I know we're probably getting close to the end, but here's what the exercise I would really encourage everybody to do. Because what is a value? What are values? I mean, if you were to define what is a value, values are nothing more than our beliefs in hierarchical order, meaning my number one value is the thing I believe in, number one. It's the most important thing. Like I said, self-sovereignty, personal sovereignty. Okay. Nothing supersedes that to me. Okay. And then right under that is honesty, candor, one and the same thing for me. I like you, what you see is what you get, man.
Authenticity, man. Yep. That's number two for me. Yep.
Yeah. Authenticity, 100%. However you want to call that. Right. So when I can articulate, so what was interesting, like, and the way I discovered this is during the virus, during the Wuhan pandemic, when they were talking about vaccine passports. I was willing to create a forgery. Well, honesty is really important to me. But I remember thinking, I was sitting at dinner, I know exactly where I was with my coach and going, we were talking about this. I'm like, honesty is so important to me. I'm willing to lie. That means I have a value that supersedes honesty.
Which was personal sovereignty.
Exactly. And that's when I went, because nobody's going to tell me what I will or won't do with my body.
Correct.
And so you can see how values work, right? The number 2 value will always be subservient to your number 1 value. Number 3 is subservient to 2 and 3. So when you can start to articulate them, you now create the boundaries for your life of what you are willing to accept and what you are unwilling to accept. And when you know that, you are so powerful. Because now you can shape your life to be exactly what you want it to look like.
Dude, and this was such a powerful exercise for me because while I have laid out all of my values, I hadn't considered that discipline is number 1 for a reason. And everything below that is subservient to that for the reasons you just explained. And I really think that this is a powerful exercise. And I would encourage everybody listening to this, sit down and write out what your values are and then ask questions of those values so you can order them in the proper order. I think that's probably one of the most powerful exercises I could think of. So thank you for that, Dave, because that really is a powerful exercise.
Come up with scenarios that intentionally put the values in conflict and ask yourself, which way do you want to go? And that will tell you which one is your number or is the superior of the 2 values.
I love this. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Mr. Dave Rosenberg. Please, if you find value in these episodes, like, share, rate, review, download. Help me get this in front of 1 million veterans before May 9th, 2025, which is the day I turn 40. It's a lofty goal. I say this every episode. There's 19 million veterans in the United States. If you all just took 2 seconds to hit the share button, this would spread like wildfire and we would hit that goal. Until next week, I hope you found value in this. I hope you continue to find value in this. Please don't hesitate to reach out. I read all emails with any suggestions for guests we should have on this show, questions we should ask of future guests, anything that you want to know. Please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know about those things. And we'll see you next week with another enthralling episode. Take care, everybody. That's our show, and I'm truly thankful you've joined us at The Strategic Veteran. If our conversation today sparked curiosity or if you're ready to elevate your game, I'm here to help. Visit thestrategicveteran.com for exclusive show notes and resources or to book a coaching session directly with me. Take a moment to subscribe to our podcast and share your review. Your support makes all the difference. For more insights and daily strategies, let's connect on LinkedIn and keep the conversation going. Remember, this isn't just a podcast, it's your strategic advantage in action. Until our next rendezvous, stay bold and continue the mission.